What is your name, what are your pronouns, and what are you going to talk about today?
So my name is Hayley Dumas, she, her, and I'm going to talk about dyslexia.
Could you please give us a Dyslexia 101?
So dyslexia is a neurodivergent condition that affects one in a very low number. So it's different for everybody. My personal form of dyslexia, the way it affects me, is my visual stress test is orange. I struggle with spelling from all the time, words that I absolutely am confident that I understand. I miss words out of sentences. If you're having a conversation over there and I'm typing away, trying to concentrate, I will type the words from because that's just the way my brain works. I struggle sometimes with regards to presentation. So it's very difficult to give a Dyslexia 101 in all fairness, because it affects everybody, every individual in different ways.
How did being dyslexic affect you growing up?
So I always knew to a certain extent that I struggled with reading and writing, particularly if it's in front of people. So I remember being in a class and being asked to stand up and read out something from a book, and really struggling, and I get in my own head, and that still happens to this day. So this particular day I was reading from a book and I really struggled with it, and the teacher's reaction to me was terrible, so negative. She actually started shouting at me and I was crying, and that made me not regress but pull back from ever putting my hand up, and never did I volunteer to read in front of people ever again after that. Hand on heart, I had to try so much harder, and all my friends were so intelligent, and they would go out, and when I'm doing exams, no, I need to revise. I need to revise parrot fashion. I need to make it almost like the lyrics to a song. So I would record myself with my little karaoke machine, reading from my exercise books, and then play it back to myself when I went to sleep. I did absolutely everything that I knew within my sort of arsenal to be able to get me through those exams. When I worked on the aircraft, I worked on 3 different types of aircraft, and fixed and safety equipment is in a different place on each aircraft. For Virgin Atlantic, you had to get an 80% pass mark every single day. So you would have an exam every morning. All of the activities, exercises and knowledge and skills that you'd covered the previous day, you would have an exam. And the rest of my cohort were going out, and not me. I had to parrot fashion go through everything that I'd done that day. I'd even do, this is going to sound a little bit bizarre, but I read somewhere at the time that smells trigger memory. So I would smell I would have a glass of red wine while I was revising, not as a teenager when I'm talking Virgin Atlantic. When I was revising for my exam, I'd have a glass of red wine, and then in the morning I'd sniff the bottle before I went. And I know this sounds really silly, but I passed over 80% pass mark every single day, so it helped.
Have you felt you've been marginalised or stereotyped due to being dyslexic?
Yeah, I do think I have. But then, is it my perception? Because I always try and sort of think of it as rationally and reasonably as I possibly can. So is it just my perception that certain things have happened to me? So I've presumed that it's to do with my dyslexia, or is it actually because I'm dyslexic? So before I was knew 100% that I was dyslexic, before I went through all the testing and everything like that, I would say people would not send me a certain piece of work to do because she's a nightmare, she doesn't spell it, she gets all spelling wrong, and that was muted. Hayley, why are you writing on all that rubbish on the custody record? So before, I think, it was like, don't give Hayley that to do, she'll mess it up. And then once it was confirmed, my dyslexia, I would say the opposite is true. It was like, right, okay, so we get it. We get it. What can we do to help? So yes and no. It's had its the diagnosis or the actual confirmation that I've got dyslexia has been really positive for me, because I'm owning it.
Have you felt quite accepted at university?
We all know in an environment such as this that literacy and accuracy is very much embedded in the culture of it. It's in the walls, isn't it, of this organisation. And that's why I think it's really important that if you are dyslexic, that you make people aware of it so that they don't inadvertently upset you or make you feel less or other. But that is, again, that's an individual's. If you don't feel confident to declare, then you're not going to put yourself in a vulnerable position with your peers or superiors. Me, this is exactly who I am. So don't be surprised if there's 3 or 4 words missing in that email, because whilst I use my read and write software, it affects the pace in which I can produce work. And a lot of the work that I do, specifically in the EDI space, needs to be actioned as accurately, but also as efficiently and quickly as possible. So if I respond to an email because I think that needs to be actioned straight away and there's words missing, as far as I'm concerned, the risk around that is the positive outweigh the negative of me missing a couple of words. So to the spelling and punctuation police amongst us in the institution, I just say, this is exactly the way I am.
Could you do some myth busting about stereotypes surrounding dyslexia?
Again, this is only going to be my personal perspective and my personal lived experience. As I said before, it affects people in very different ways. But I would say I can spell and I can articulate normally. I do have quite a wide vocabulary. So I think a stereotype or a myth around dyslexia is you absolutely can't read or write and you're illiterate. That is factually incorrect. Myths around dyslexic people: you're going to do things slower, you're going to do things less accurately, you're a linear thinker, when again the opposite is true. Some of the greatest minds and some of the most innovative people in our country are dyslexic. Richard Branson, for example, Albert Einstein. There's some really successful people are dyslexic. Keira Knightley, she's a very successful actress, very successful in her own right, and is dyslexic. There's so many people who are super successful and they're dyslexic, and people who literally learn lines for a living.
How could the people around you and the university do better?
I think recognising the strengths that someone with dyslexia brings to the table more, as opposed to the negative, concentrating on the negatives. Oh, you need support with this. Oh, you need support with that. Or we can accommodate this, or we can accommodate that. Whilst all of that is really good and really kind and really helpful, actually, as far as your skill set as an employee of the organisation is concerned, being dyslexic is an additional skill. It genuinely means that you think things slightly differently. Like we said before, that sort of diverse thinking, that out of the box thinking, that innovative thinking, that people who are more linear or structured, it wouldn't necessarily come to mind. So I would say utilising the strengths more of our dyslexic cohort, whether that be students or staff, and learning from their, in this format, for example, learning from people's lived experiences and saying, right, okay, what can I do then to gain from your strengths that you have and your differences? And again, it speaks to that education piece, consistently talking about these things, having the confidence to say, this is a part of my identity, my character, this is what makes me me. I'll help you to better understand me, but keep the stereotypes, the assumptions, and all of the other stuff that can be exhausting for somebody to have to negate or challenge consistently. Keep those to yourself, because actually we all need to learn to be better understanding of people's differences. Not avoiding the conversation. A lot of us are afraid to get things wrong. So if you're afraid to get something wrong, whether it's to be with somebody's race, identity, sexual orientation, well, let's just not talk about it, because then we won't get it wrong. Whereas I'm an EDI lead and I get it wrong, I learn, we move on. you need, I think that's something that's really, really important when you're talking in this space. And I think that's something that we need to do better as a university. We need to provide assessment services for staff. We do all that in SBLD, and they are fantastic. But what do we actually do for our staff who may think themselves, this could be something, and should the burden of cost be on the employee to go out there and financially support that assessment? In my opinion, no. It should be, we should equip every person that we employ with the capabilities, the skills, the equipment to be able to do their job. And if that means running them through, having some dyslexia assessors in the organisation and running them through that testing to be able to identify what support they need to be able to be successful in their role and feel valued in their role. So I think we could do better in that way.
How do you feel the media represents someone with dyslexia?
The media's sort of narrative around dyslexia are moving in that sort of tone, that space of celebrating people with dyslexia. And I think that does help. It has some positives and has some negatives. Speaking to the point that we just made around avoiding the subject, it's highlighting all the fantastic positive things about somebody who is dyslexic. So I think it's definitely changing. The tone's changing, the narrative's changing, but there will have been a point. I was born in 81, and I remember it certainly wasn't on mainstream television, but it wasn't in schools. I don't think in schools they knew enough around it to help support people. And it was it sounds awful, but the narrative was, you're a dunce, actually. And that was the way I was treated. So on my LinkedIn profile, for example, in the same way as I identify my pronouns, I also identify as a dyslexic thinker. And there's some videos on there of really successful people in the country who talk about their lived experience around dyslexia. And I think in a way it's kind of sort of championing that it's a superpower. It's not something that you need to be ashamed of. It's not something that you need to shy away from.
Is there anything else you would like to say or anything else you would like anyone to know about dyslexia?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that if you do think that you may be dyslexic, take the assessment. It's scary. It is quite a scary feeling because you think, especially if you don't know enough about dyslexia, especially if you don't know enough about the testing or what that means to you. Am I employable? Actually, yes, you are. And as part of our disability confident commitment as an employer, if you tell us that you're dyslexic, we will put reasonable adjustments in place, even for interview, So I just think, don't be scared to declare these types of things, because there is more support out there than you may know about. And just be proud of who you are and all the fantastic skills that you bring to the table, dyslexic or not dyslexic.